Hello, I'm Virginia Senator Mark Warner, and I want to thank the McCain Institute for International Leadership and Arizona State University for allowing me to share a few words with you today. Before I start, though, I want to take a moment and reflect back on John McCain. He was a true American hero. I remember one of my first interactions with him. I was a brand new senator, and it was the first year that President Obama was giving his State of the Union. And senators all gathered together, usually with one invited guest, for a dinner before the State of the Union. That dinner, I got a chance to sit next to John's mother, Roberta. She was in her 90s at that point and still fiery, enormous energy, and we reflected back on her times when the McCains lived in Norfolk. And that was a story that John and I shared for many times when he said that I helped take care of his mom that first Obama State of the Union. We miss him, and we miss his dedicated and principled leadership. In that spirit of John McCain, I want to take a moment, though, and talk about what I believe is one of the most emerging challenges our nation faces, and that is the rise of China, and particularly China's rise in a whole field of advanced technologies. And when I mention China, I want to make clear that my beef is with the Communist Party of China and with President Xi Jinping and their policies, whether it be their outrageous policies against the Uyghurs or their policies against the people of Hong Kong or their spreading of authoritarian and support for authoritarian regimes all over the world. It is not a beef with the Chinese people, the Chinese diaspora, or particular with Chinese Americans and Asian Americans in our country. When people make those kind of comments, that kind of bias and prejudice comments, all we do is play into the Communist Party's goals of undermining America. The challenge that the CCP presents is that for many, many years, we in America and in the West felt that in every new technology, we would dominate. America would either invent, or even if we weren't inventing the technology, oftentimes we set the rules, the procedures, the protocols of these new technologies. We now see China with enormous investments in research and development, China with efforts that literally steals intellectual property close to $500 billion a year from American universities, laboratories, and for that matter, companies and universities around the world, and a very directed approach by China to really be on the cutting edge of a host of new technologies. In particular, as someone who spent a background in telecommunications before getting into politics, I've seen how China has been able to both set the standards, the rules, and the protocols for the emerging 5G technology. 5G wireless technology will in many ways be the undergirding of everything that will, all kinds of Internet of Things devices. They will ride on this kind of 5G technology. And what we've seen is China come about and literally flood the zones on the international standard setting bodies, and in many ways create a set of rules that favors China's technology. China's rule and China's approach, what I call authoritarian capitalism, is they have enormous competition within the Chinese market, but that competition always favors a Chinese national champion. In the case of 5G, it ended up being Huawei. And when a Chinese company ends up dominating the Chinese domestic market and getting 75 to 80% of that market, that oftentimes translates into 20 to 25% of the global market. Giving a single company that kind of lead and then giving China's ability to finance those companies, in the case of Huawei, close to $100 billion financing, presents a very powerful adversary, a very powerful competitor that no single American company, or for that matter, Western company, can compete with. So it's my belief we not only need to dramatically increase our basic research and development budget, not only in 5G, but across all new technologies, artificial intelligence, quantum technology, biotech, but we need to recognize that we need to create a series of technology-based alliances. I think, as John McCain often pointed out, that America's enormous military strength was strengthened by our alliances. If we look in a post-World War II context, we started initially with military alliances, then economic alliances. I think in the 21st century, we're going to need technology alliances, not only around 5G, but as I mentioned, AI, quantum, biotech, a host of areas. Taking on, and once again, having America establish leadership in not only basic research, but also having that basic research then supported by technology alliances that reflect our values like transparency, support for human rights, I think would build upon the legacy that John McCain gave to all of us. The challenge of China is great, but it is nothing that we can't overcome if we have this kind of collaborative and cooperative approach. I hope that my role as chairman of the Intelligence Committee, that we can continue to promote American technology. We can continue to call out and sort out the rise of competitors like China, but that we can also do it in a way that reflects our basic values. I think this would be something that John McCain, if he was still living, would be supportive of, and I hope that we can all carry on in his fine tradition.
Thank you, Eric. So, this is for the McCain Institute for International Leadership, and usually this time of year we run a thing called the Sedona Forum. This year we can't be there, we're doing it this way. So what I thought we could do, if it's all right with you, is just spend some time talking about, all of this unbelievable opportunity that we're sitting at right now with computational power accelerating, with artificial intelligence and what I call augmented intelligence versus artificial intelligence, programming accelerating, with opportunities accelerating. I want to get into all of that. I want to get into your role with the National Security Commission on AI and all of that. But I think it'd be really useful to help listeners to understand a little bit about where you're coming at this from. So I want to go all the way back to what the world was like when you were an undergrad and you were a graduate student studying what you studied, and how different that is even in one generation from where we presently are. So what were you learning, when you were in school? What were you focused on? You were getting fundamentals and so forth and so on, but just sort of give a sense of where, give us a time setting, what was going on, what you were learning, and how similar or how different that is from the technological moment we're at right now.
When I got the invitation to the Sedona Forum, I knew that I should come. And I especially knew that if Michael would be participating with me, it would be a great privilege. Michael has been a partner of mine for almost 30 years, and you see the impact that he's had, not just on Arizona, but at the national level. So I'm really happy to be here. I got involved in computing when I was in high school, and computer science pretty much didn't exist. I got access to a very slow time-sharing machine.
Is that like early 70s? I mean, just to put everybody into perspective.
Early 1970s. It's the era of the mainframe.
Yeah.
And at the time, the exciting things were operating systems and programming languages, which is what I worked on. But Bell Labs had just founded a group that came to invent Unix, and Xerox PARC had just been founded to invent the Office of the Future. And the combination of the two was a fantastic platform for what has happened the last 40 years. The biggest thing that has happened has been the improvement in computation. I calculated that my iPhone is 100 million times more powerful than the computer that I used and shared in college, which was so large, it was in the basement of a specialized building with a raised floor, and it had 3 megabits. And you know how many gigabytes you have.
Yeah.
Those 3 megabits were built using computers with cores. They would run wires through magnetics, and they'd hold it that way. Oh my God, what has Moore's law brought to us?
Yeah, this iPhone 12 has almost 12 billion transistors on its A4 chip, and so it's beyond belief. And the transistor was just the generation before us. I mean, even it didn't exist. So, what was your attraction to computing and computers, and where did you think all that was going since it was so early?
I liked computers because I could build things. And I've now understood that this is a pattern that many teenagers have gone through. You're an educator, so you see this every day. But basically, when you're a teenager, you need some kind of identity, some kind of a validation. And I'm convinced now, as I look back, my ability to build things, right, to build them out of the parts at the time and to master that was key to why I was so motivated by it today. Today, there's a language called Scratch, and they teach this down at even 10-year-olds.
Mm-hmm.
So I can only imagine what a teenager today can do.
Yeah.
And with educators in high school, they typically start the kids doing things involving gaming or things which are visual. None of that was possible when I was, but I would have loved that.
So, not very many people go on and get their PhD, and even fewer go on and get their PhD in something as technically complex as you did. Why did you do that, and what did you focus on in your dissertation? What I'm trying to lay for the audience here is the foundation of here you end up being the chairman of this National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. Well, you just don't give that role to anybody. So why did you go on to get a PhD, and what did you focus on?
Well, when I was in high school, I wanted to be an architect. And I went to Princeton as an architect, and I got to architecture school and I realized I wasn't very good at it.
Yeah. Could you draw, or was drawing a problem?
Drawing was a problem, but I was very organized, and but I was not creative, which means it's a perfect position for engineers who are not nearly as creative, but boy, are we organized.
Yeah.
And because I had done programming in high school, I skipped the introductory course and went literally into a second-year program around programming. And I was just obsessed with it. Mm-hmm. And I think that programming as a tool and as a task and as a life's calling was what got me to where I am today.
Yeah.
And I often wonder, how is it that I went from being a programmer, an undergraduate, a PhD in networking and network science, software development, and so forth, and then began running businesses? Yeah. They're not that different. Mm-hmm. Because running a business is an architecture problem. You have to organize everything. Running a business is an engineering problem in that you have to organize it with outcomes. Mm-hmm. So what I always try to explain is that if you have a computer science running a company, you may not be very creative, but you're going to get replication and scale right, because that's what they teach you in computer science school. And indeed, if you look at the great tech companies, they all came from simple things that scaled really fast. Mm-hmm. And that scaling is so fast, humans have trouble understanding how fast. Even I, after all of these years, always underestimate how fast something small, if it's architected just right, can explode. That principle, which is generally known as technology network effects and platform effects, is bedeviling everyone else because public policy and governments and philosophers are not used to things that grow that quickly and have such a big impact. And that's the narrative of our time.
Yeah, in fact, I've talked for a little while that our democracy, which is deliberate and argumentative and deeply built around the idea of compromise, that it may not have exact compatibility with high-speed technology network effects that are going on and in paces of change and driving change that our political system can't really even fully grasp. But let's go back to, could you see when you got your PhD, could you see where all this was going? Could you see artificial intelligence outcomes, or was that beyond where the horizon was at the moment?
Certainly not. And in fact, when I got my PhD, which was basically in the early 1980s, mm-hmm. artificial intelligence had died. Mm-hmm. The original term was coined in the late 1950s. And the presumption was that within a decade, computers would be able to interact with humans at a level that was conversational and intelligent. Right. Of course, we know that didn't happen. And it didn't happen until a revolution occurred in the late 90s with a technology called deep learning. Mm-hmm. And this technology in deep learning is a mathematical principle first, but it depends on an enormous amount of data and computation, literally just acres and acres and acres of computers and buildings and power and so forth. It was not conceivable even in the 1990s. And indeed, the person who invented this, his name is Jeff Hinton, had worked on these ideas along with another fellow who now runs Facebook's AI for almost 25 years with no success. They worked on it academically, they published papers, nobody cared about them. And then all of a sudden, the technology platform caught up with the mathematics. Mm-hmm. There was a contest, and the contest was a vision contest. Mm-hmm. And this vision contest was about, could computers recognize things and classify them? It was called ImageNet. It was done around 2011. And that contest got everyone focused on what these algorithms could do. The fact that computers could initially recognize and eventually see better than humans kicked off what we have today, which is this enormous explosion again. So you have, what, over 25 years, you've gone from zero to essentially infinite power and interest in AI. That's how.
Yeah, what's interesting though about what you say, I remember I got in an argument years ago with a group here about why we were still making investments in math, and somebody in the argument said, well, don't we already know everything about math? And I said, are you kidding me? And so people don't understand that artificial intelligence systems and computational systems are mathematically driven machines that are performing algorithmic acrobatics based on our actual understanding of math. And so it even comes back to where I'm going to head with some of this conversation to, why we need the National Science Foundation, why we need, better math skills, why we need more geometric topological mapping tools and all kinds of other things. But let's go back to this technology trajectory. So if we were on a trajectory then, you as an undergraduate and a graduate student, and call that X, what is the technological trajectory that we're on now? All within your single lifetime, we're on a completely differentiated technological trajectory when it comes to AI and computation and so forth. So what do you call the present trajectory versus what it was?
Let's look at the speed with which this has happened, because people don't understand how profound this is. When I was an undergraduate, there was no computer science at college. Today, the #1 major in the majority of United States colleges, beating out, for example, politics and economics, is computer science. That's in my generation. Today, the most valuable companies in the United States, 5 or 6, are all tech companies based on the principles of computer science. The most valuable companies in China, roughly 3 or 4, are all computer science-based companies. There's every reason to think that in essentially 1 to 2 generations, computing has gone from something that was of interest to nerds, mathematically based, small teams, very interesting, to these megalith structures. The teams that bring you the technology that you use today are thousands of people each. I was interested, how big is Zoom? Probably could be done by 10 people, couldn't it?
Yeah.
3,000 employees and growing fast.
Yeah.
And they're good. They provided a brand new service. Did anyone in this audience know about a Zoom more than a year ago?
No.
Virtually no one did.
Yeah.
So it gives you a sense of the rapid scaling in technology for what are network platforms. It looks to me as I go forward that there are going to be 5 or 6 network platforms that are going to determine the future, not just the future for our universities we care about, you and me, and even our country, but it will determine world order. And those technologies are basically platform technologies, semiconductors, that sort of thing, a huge fight right there. Yeah. Artificial intelligence, huge fight going on right there. Yeah. Synthetic biology, something you've been working in a lot, huge fights going on there.
Right.
Energy, quantum computing, quantum physics in general. These are all areas where huge new businesses are going to happen. If I were a 20-year-old version of myself, I would be overwhelmed by the scale of the businesses that are in front of me. And I guess I would use some random algorithm to decide which one of them I liked. Maybe it was a great faculty member, or maybe it's because I was always interested in biology, just not the messy part. I just wanted to do the digital part.
Yeah.
You can be a biologist today and do nothing in a lab.
Yeah.
That's how powerful these technologies are.
Right. I mean, there's Isaac Asimov in 1956 wrote this fantastic article called The Last Question, where it's basically where we're headed as a species, driven by advanced computation, and computation ultimately becoming ubiquitous. And that harnessed with us basically capturing the ability to manipulate photons to do whatever we want in terms of unlimited energy, gave us the ability to compute in an unlimited way without an energy cost associated with that computing, which then gave us the ability to be creative across all things, ultimately leading to the settlement of the galaxy, the settlement of other galaxies, even in this story, even outliving stars and so forth and so on, meaning, that powerful of a thing. And I don't want to get all hyperbolic here, but what do you, before we get into the details of where we are in the present emergent, global powers of planet Earth, do you see this having, this kind of species altering effect, I guess is the question.
I do, but in very different timescales.
Mm-hmm.
Many people have wanted to explore the planets and the stars and so forth. That will happen, but probably not a lot more in our lifetimes because of the physics of power and energy, awaiting new discoveries that future brilliant people will come up. It will happen, but we probably won't see it. I'm still waiting for the infrastructure of our country to get built up, more bridges and roads and tunnels. That seems to be not in my lifetime.
Yes.
However, the digital world and things which are enabled by digital technology are moving at an incredible speed. If I told you 10 years ago that the topics over this next decade that just occurred, of course, in this scenario would include Russian interference in the United States elections, and tremendous concern over technology companies censoring speech and the use of the technology companies to alter elections, the one thing I would have told you is, I guarantee you that would not have happened. I guarantee you. And the reason I know this is I wrote a book about the future of the internet and our society. I didn't mention those.
Yeah.
How could I have missed those?
Yes.
Well, the answer is because it's really hard to predict how fast these things happen and how they're going to get used.
Yeah.
I'm going to try again. And I'm going to tell you that the world around us, the elevators and the buildings on your campus and the rules of universities, they're not going to change that much. But our social fabric, the way we communicate and literally the information space that we live in is going to change very dramatically. I'll give you a negative example because it's easier to think about negative examples. Let's say that we stopped doing anything in tech and we just let the tech companies in China take over, which we're not going to do.
Yeah.
How would they be different? Well, there'd be a lot of censorship. There'd be a lot of government tracking. And the culture and style would seem wrong to us. It would seem foreign.
Yeah.
Right? We take for granted that we control that. But imagine if theirs are better and they're so much better, we have to use theirs. I'll give you another example. With artificial intelligence, it will be possible to broadcast to Michael Crow directly exactly what he cares about. Right? Because we can figure out roughly who you are, what your biases are, and we can, furthermore, we get a signal more and more about what you watch and so forth. We can do narrow casting to you.
Yeah.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, Michael Crow might love that because it's more and more of the things you're interested in. But there's a benefit to society for seeing the other perspectives and so forth. Now, you and I would do this collaboratively. But what if a foreign power starts to interfere with our information space by adding misinformation? We're seeing this in the political dynamic. Right. Some of the well-known Russian activities include funding anything which is disruptive to our democracy.
Right.
Now, if you said, by the way, your tools, Eric, are going to be used to disrupt democracy, I'd say that's another thing that will never happen because who cares? Why would somebody want to do that?
Right.
But if you're Russia and you are operating from a minority military power perspective, but you have a strategic goal of destabilizing your opponent, in this case, the United States, it's a perfectly inexpensive strategy.
And your people have no voice in your government, so you get a few people that have a certain sort of bent look at the world. So let's go back to then one of the complexities here. So here we have a math-based, algorithm-driven, computationally expanding from a speed and complexity perspective system, which by its nature, because of math and algorithms, is highly international and highly transferable. So it's an easy technology to absorb the work of others in some sense. It's easy to foundationally move forward quickly. It's something that can be moved in certain directions. And so how does one take, by its nature, an internationally oriented technological capability or scientific capability, if math is called a science, and then at some point start thinking about how to manage its deployment technologically? What I'm after is it's an open system and then it's not. And so how do we deal with that nature of the beast here, math and computer science and algorithms, and then managing technology?
So these technologies are without doubt dual use. They can be used for national security or offensive purposes, as well as to benefit society. All the technologies that I'm describing have enormous positive effects for humanity. If you care about drugs for diseases and diseases that have bedeviled humans for years, the advances in synthetic biology and artificial intelligence and machine learning are going to accelerate drug discovery and medical treatments at a rate we've never seen.
As they did with mRNA. So we would not have mRNA vaccines for this virus, and we'd have many, many more casualties if not for computational power. So
there will be many, many such benefits. And each country is going to struggle with the question, Michael, that you asked. And it'll be something like, this technology scales, it does some things we don't like, we're going to try to regulate it, we're going to try to regulate the companies, and we're also going to try to regulate foreign intrusion or interference in our affairs. The most likely scenario is that you're going to end up with roughly two spaces. The first will be China and her friends, because China is becoming more and more repressive with respect to speech and communications in its internet. And the Chinese population as a whole seems generally happy with that. Mm-hmm. Chinese internet provides a great deal of safety. The fact that transactions are fully digital means there's very little crime of that nature. The surveillance society that they're building has some benefits. I'm not endorsing them, and I would never endorse them. Sure. I'm telling you that from their perspective, it works, and they're exporting it to their partner countries, such as the BRI countries.
And they see, from their view, it's a completely positive tool on many dimensions, right?
And in the West, what will happen is we're going to have constant debates between the European views on privacy, the United States views on privacy, and so forth. And we have to overcome them, because at the end of the day, scale matters. I used to say that the beauty of my field is that 5 people could build this thing and change the world. Well, that's not actually true anymore. I've been looking at the scale and size of these platforms, and they are 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 with huge revenue streams. These are complicated and powerful organizations. Let's think about Apple, the most valuable company in the world, the most valuable company in America. It's not a little company. It's complicated. It's a complicated human system, and very, very, very well run. So what will happen is there'll be this constant debate over, will we allow this or that? What kind of speech? Everyone has their own view. My personal view is much more libertarian than most people think. I'm really in favor of free speech for humans.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm not in favor of free speech for robots.
Yes.
So I would draw the line of amplification. And in other words, I would say, even if I terribly dislike another American's view, I want to be able to hear it. I'm not sure I want to hear a robot's view. I'm with you completely. I'm kind of a progressive libertarian in the sense that, and I believe in that same thing. I also think, though, that the person's identity should be, if you're saying it, it should be you saying it. Exactly. It has to actually be you, and it actually be provably you.
Yes.
So we're going to go through all of these things as a society, but it's easy in America to spend all your time complaining. I want to make it sure that our audience understands that we just got through a horrific pandemic with almost 600,000 people dead. I am really grateful that Amazon got me my packages, that Apple got me my computing, that Google gave me answers to questions when I was sitting there worried about our future. I am grateful to them. And so before we go and we break them up and antitrust them and so forth and so on, let's understand that they do provide some really fundamental value, which is why they're so large and they're so effective.
Well, not just that, but you mentioned scale. You can't look at scale the way you look at it in other things. And so scale now is infinitely expandable. So they're actually small scaled entities when you look at the scale of what the economy will be or could be. I want to go back before we swing into the commission. So you've got all these things that are driving these technologies forward. You've got streams of knowledge that are influencing what ultimately would be our technological outcomes. What are the most important or the most significant streams of knowledge? And they may be things that are outside of computer science also. So what are the streams of knowledge that are driving these technologies or could be driving these technologies into net positive, increased net positive outcomes? We're getting net positive outcomes, but how do we increase the net positive outcomes?
Well, one way to answer your question is to look at where is the majority of the discovery going on right now. And one metric is the rate at which new papers are being published, especially pre-publications. And there are two. One is called bioRxiv, another one is called archive. Archive is the one for technology and computing, and bioRxiv is the one for biology. And the biology one is immense. Now, this may have been accelerated by the pandemic and all the money that is being spent on research, which has enabled us to get to the point where vaccine, because of a government failure and so forth, are really only alternative to dealing with this pandemic. But there's no question that the biology revolution has laid the ground for an enormous explosion. And there are many measurements that you can use: that size of biology programs, the amounts of money going in, the new drug candidates, the new idea of drug factories, the way of automating all of these things. I think it's clear to me that that's where the next great innovations will be. I mentioned China. You should also know that China is not asleep at the wheel. China has large amounts of sequencing efforts. It appears to me that China is trying to sequence everything.
I've been all over that place, and they are doing everything they can to evolve 1,000 years of non-scientific focus in 40 years.
Yeah. And it's extraordinary what they have done.
Yeah.
And part of it, by the way, and just to make sure people understand what we're up against, last time I was in China, right before COVID, I was introduced to the concept of 996. You work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. Last time I checked, that's illegal in America.
Yeah.
And that's
except at ASU, we all work 996. So why did we need a National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence? Why did you lead it? And I've read the report. It's fantastic. I know some of your fellow commissioners. I know some of the staff. It's a great outcome. What's its core message to all of our listeners? What do we take away from the commission?
So a number of congressional representatives, including Elise Stefanik, put in the NDAA, which is the one bill that always goes through, the request to have a commission of 15 people appointed by the Congress. I was one of the people appointed. I was actually appointed by Mac Thornberry, a Republican who was a fantastic leader who has since retired. And the idea was unconstrained, take a look at artificial intelligence and what America needs to do to protect it. And the primary bias was national security, although other things there were no constraints.
Right.
So we set out as a commission. I was elected by the commission as chairman. And we set out a series of meetings before the pandemic. And we started to understand where we were in terms of AI versus competitors, and in particular against China and Russia. And we ultimately developed a set of themes. And I'll just summarize where they are. And the report is readable, as you mentioned. It's very long, but it has a good summary for people who are interested. The first thing that it says is that we are woefully unprepared for AI as a country. Our companies are moving very fast, but the country is not.
So you mean socially and in all kinds of ways?
It's everything.
Yeah.
But let's start with the federal government. The federal government is full of very nice people who are not very technically trained in AI. I know this because there are very few such people in general, and the government couldn't afford them anyway. So you have an awful lot of people who are struggling with this, who don't have the basic training in the field. That's something that you at ASU are trying to address over time, and I'm doing it in other ways. But right now we have a crisis.
And a model of undercompensating critical functionalities in our government, which is, I think, silliness, but yes.
Just terrible. We call for the nation to be AI ready by 2025. In other words, 4 years from now. We lay out a set of things that the country needs to do. I'll give you some examples and we can go into them if interested. We looked a lot at AI and AI research, and there's an awful lot of AI to be discovered in the future. So in other words, there's so much we don't know. It's the beginning of physics. It's the beginning of math. It's a whole new field.
Yes.
So we recommend doubling the AI research funding up until $32 billion over the next 3 or 4 years. And so that alone would be that's probably the fastest we can invent it.
But including math and the underlying things also? Yeah.
But this is the hardcore research.
Right.
How do the algorithms work?
Right.
I'll give an example. In AI, we don't actually understand why these algorithms work. We don't understand how they fail. They have a lot of bias problems with the data that they're fed. These are important research issues that we need to address. And there's new ideas coming out every time. To give you an idea, the premier conference occurs once a year. And it occurred, I think in December, it was virtual. They had 12,000 papers. And the leading papers were from the United States and from China. That gives you a sense of where the competition is. We looked a lot at how the US does research, something you have driven in your career to extraordinary extents. And what we discovered is that foreign students, especially Chinese-born students, are very important. That the ranking of the papers indicates that the United States is ahead of China, but we are ahead in China partly because we have Chinese graduate students who are in America helping us do those inventions. We need to keep them. And by the way, we need to keep them in the country and give them visas so they can found companies, become wealthy, and pay taxes in America. We don't want them going back to China.
Right.
The other thing that we discovered is that the government, something that you probably know very well now, is very disorganized in its basic form. And the only way to get something to happen is to have something at the presidential or vice presidential level. So we recommend a Technology Competitiveness Council, which would look at global competition under the vice president's office and make sure the federal world is getting in alignment. We spend a lot of time on talent. We propose, as you know, because you were part of these discussions, creating a technical civilian university that would be free to the students in return for 5 years of service to the federal government. We have a program that's similar to ROTC, et cetera, and so forth, to try to get talent into the government. We spent quite a bit of time looking at semiconductors. These AI systems depend on enormous amounts of computation, and the quality and speed of semiconductors will have a huge impact on whether we can retain our lead. We are ahead now, but not by much. And the consensus is that we need to stay 2 generations ahead of China in semiconductors.
Which then is more research related to faster, smaller,
everything,
less heat, all of those things.
And so let me give you an example of why, and this is a problem that's been known for a long time. We didn't discover it. So I'll tell you a story. So Intel, which has a large fab in Arizona, abandoned its 7 nanometer technology for a particular set of technical reasons. They were having yield problems, et cetera. And their competitor is from TSMC, which is a 5 nanometer, which is better, smaller is better, built in Taiwan. The TSMC factories are on the western side of Taiwan in a logically direct view of mainland China.
Right.
Mainland China has for 30 years been trying to catch up. And these are, of course, both countries are Chinese in origin, obviously, and they're still having trouble. We think that by a set of investments and a set of tools in the supply chain and making ourselves more domestically strong, we can keep that lead.
So TSMC, as you probably know, and Intel have both decided in the last 10 weeks to build 2 new multi-billion-dollar fabs here in Phoenix.
Which is fantastic.
Yeah.
And so the fact that we were not leading in semiconductors in terms of the hardcore fast stuff is catching up with us.
Yeah.
And it's also things like CAD design, system design, manufacturing, photolithography. There are to get to the next level of smaller requires even more expensive. The new fabs are 20 to 30 billion a piece. God knows, how the government is going to help there. There's an act called the CHIPS Act, which we strongly support, which is helping there. We also spend quite a bit of time talking about partnerships. So under President Trump, we forgot that our Western partners were critical for us. China has 4 times as many engineers. They're putting at least 4 times more money into it. They're going to catch up on sheer weight, right? Plus, they're willing to steal stuff that we would not be willing to steal. This is well documented. How are we going to compete with that? Well, the answer to compete is to get us plus our partners. And our partners, by the way, include Japan and South Korea.
Yes.
And possibly India, as well as our traditional European partners. So a partnership approach, and we specify in our report how the State Department should organize this. We also talk about something called the Valley of Death, which is a spot, you worked with this before, where the venture stuff can get stuff done and it can get commoditized. And we fundamentally believe that the government should do some more investing in that area.
Right.
The most important changes that we call for are in the DoD and in the intelligence community. Because the DoD can be understood as a large bureaucracy, and I served them as a special government employee for 5 years working for the Secretary of Defense. So I understand it pretty well. They're well-meaning people trapped in a very big bureaucracy that's organized around the last war, not the next war.
Mhm.
And the next war will clearly start with artificial intelligence, cyber, and some form of space issues.
Mhm.
And the government has got all of its resources and money on the older stuff,
Right.
building more tanks, aircraft carriers, that kind of stuff, and not on this new stuff. And we
Right.
have a lot of recommendations there as well. If you care about national security, which I know you and I do, and I
Mhm.
suspect the Sedona Forum, every one of the people who understood and was inspired by John McCain understands how important this is. It's really important to take the bureaucracy and modernize it. When the senator and I had dinner the last time before he became ill, he spoke with me at some length about simple things that he wanted, like auditability and responsibility. He was very upset over the waste of the existing programs. I remember him very, very well talking about this, and you must have spoken with him as well about this.
Yeah. Right.
So in his honor, I think it's easy to say, let's take this enormous amount of money and talent and let's organize it around the next problems,
Yeah.
which are clearly inclusive and covered by our report.
Well, so Eric, this has been fantastic for the forum. This notion of the nature of the future competition and future conflict and what we're going to do. So, maybe just in a few seconds, what would be your best word of advice to President Biden and his crew of what they should get going right away?
Well, it's self-serving, but we not only did we produce you all a report, but we wrote the legislation that you should adopt. So, with the help of an awful lot of people. So I would start with our work and say, how much of this can we get implemented this year? Many of these things in talent development, as you know, because you've done this for your whole life, take years. But we are today, as you discussed with me earlier, we are today at this pinnacle of computing success and power as a nation because of decisions that were made 30 or 40 years ago by small teams of the National Science Foundation, DARPA, and so forth and so on. We need to make the same really good decisions with even more money now, and we can win. I am such an optimist about America's power when we organize to win. And we propose, let's focus on AI as a strategic initiative, along with the other key businesses that I mentioned, including biology, quantum, energy, and so forth. It's going to be a fantastic 20 or 30 years.
Well, Eric, I appreciate that. And I know the audience, which is out there at the Sedona Forum, appreciates this also. And I appreciate your, once again, committing to national service and getting this commission through its track and getting these very strong messages on the table. So on behalf of everyone, I just want to say thank you. And hopefully people have got some good insights from this. And hopefully you'll be hearing from everyone about how we get this done.
And I look forward to coming to Sedona at some point in the future. What a fantastic place and organization. Thank you so much.